On Friday, February 6th, Santillon, 2025, a girl, 18 years old, met a man on a dating app before she went missing. He's now been arrested in connection with her death. Yesenia Norman allegedly met Randall Santillon through a dating app before she was reported missing on January 19. Norman, 18, was found dead with multiple stab wounds at an apartment complex in Tolleson, Arizona. Just over a week later, was arrested in Biloxi, Mississippi, in connection with Norman's death. A teenage girl who was reported missing after allegedly meeting a man on a dating app has been found dead in Arizona. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I know many of you are here to find a moment of peace, to let the chaos of the day drift away as you unwind. So before we begin, please get comfortable. Adjust your pillows, pull the blanket up to your chin, and let the darkness of the room wrap around you like a protective shield. We tell these stories to remember the names of those lost and to find order in the chaos. Tonight, we travel to the vast open skies of Arizona, where the horizon stretches endlessly and the secrets of the desert are buried beneath the winter stars. I wonder what time it is where you are right now. Perhaps the house is quiet and the rest of the world has gone to sleep. Or maybe you are taking a pain-enforced nap, needing a voice to distract you from the discomfort. Wherever you are, and whatever burdens you are carrying, you are safe here. We are awake together. Tonight, we follow a journey that spans across state lines, through the digital signals that connect us, and into the quiet resolution of a family's questions. It is a story about the fragility of trust and the invisible footprints we leave behind in the digital world. But before we walk that path, let us settle into the landscape. The Arizona desert in January is a place of stark contrasts. During the day, the sun bleaches the color from the earth, turning the scrub brush into brittle skeletons of gray and brown. But as the sun dips below the mountains, the heat evaporates instantly, replaced by a sudden deep chill that settles into the bones. It is a landscape of straight lines and long horizons, where the city lights of Phoenix bleed slowly into the shadow of the mountains. The city of Tolleson sits within this sprawling valley. It is a place of industry and residence, where the hum of the I-10 freeway is a constant, low-frequency vibration in the air. At 2 in the morning, the sodium streetlights cast a specific shade of orange over the empty parking lots, a heavy, artificial glow that makes the shadows stretch long and thin across the asphalt. The air is dry, tasting of dust and distant rain that never seems to fall. In these quiet hours, the apartment complexes look identical, row after row of beige stucco and closed doors, each one holding 1,000 different lives in suspended animation. We often believe that our safety lies in the physical world, in the locks on our doors and the fences around our yards. We teach ourselves to fear the dark alley or the unlit street. But in the modern age, the danger does not always hide in the shadows of the physical world. Sometimes it arrives through the soft blue glow of a screen, carried on a signal that passes through walls as easily as a ghost. 18 is an age of open doors. It is a threshold, a moment in time where the world feels vast and waiting to be known. For Yesenia Norman, who was known to her friends and family as Cece, 18 was just the beginning. She was a beautiful and bright young woman, standing on the precipice of adulthood, looking out at a future that seemed to offer endless possibilities. Yesenia was living in a time of transition, quite literally. She was a resident at a transitional facility contracted with the Arizona Department of Child Safety. To some, such a place might sound clinical, a sterile institution of rules and regulations. But for those living within its walls, it was a home, however temporary. It was a place of communal hallways where the floorboards creaked under the weight of passing footsteps, and where the view from the window offered a glimpse of the wider world she was preparing to enter. Her relationship with her mother, Jessica Nunez, was the tether that kept her grounded. It was the bond of a parent watching a child grow up. That bittersweet mixture of pride and worry that comes with seeing a daughter navigate the world on her own terms. Jessica saw Cece not just as a daughter, but as a light, a young woman with a vibrant spirit who was eager to connect, to love, and to be loved. But the search for connection is a vulnerable thing. In a city of millions, loneliness can still find a way to settle in. And like so many others of her generation, Yesenia looked for that connection in the palm of her hand. The digital world offers the illusion of intimacy without the immediate risk of proximity. It allows us to curate our lives, to present the best versions of ourselves, and to believe that the person on the other end of the message is doing the same. Trust is often built on the fragile foundation of words typed into the silence of the night. A message sent, a notification received, a small dopamine hit that feels like affection. For Yesenia, the phone was a lifeline to a world of potential romance, a way to bypass the awkwardness of chance encounters and find someone who seemed to be looking for the same things she was. It was in this digital space that she crossed paths with Randall Santillan. He was 27 years old, nearly a decade her senior. To an 18-year-old, 27 can feel like a lifetime of experience, a maturity that is attractive and reassuring. The messages flowed between them, invisible threads weaving a connection that felt real, even if they had never stood in the same room. We leave pieces of ourselves everywhere we go, echoes in the data that tell the story when we cannot. And as the days in January ticked by, those digital echoes were painting a picture of a meeting that was about to take place. On the evening of January 15th, the winter air in Phoenix was crisp. The sun had set early, casting the valley into that deep desert darkness. Yesenia made a decision. She decided to bridge the gap between the digital world and the physical one. She told friends she was going to meet someone. It was a simple plan, born of the optimism of youth. She stepped out of the transitional facility, the door clicking shut behind her, and walked into the cool night air. She was unaware that she was stepping out of the safety of the known and into a silence that would soon envelop an entire community. The city lights flickered in the distance, indifferent and steady. The cars on the freeway rushed by, carrying people to their homes and their families. But for Yesenia, the journey was leading her toward an apartment in Tolleson and a door that was waiting to be closed. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know many of you are here tonight to find a moment of peace, to let the heavy weight of the day drift away as you fall asleep. So please get comfortable. You are joining us for a pain-enforced nap, or simply looking to quiet a racing mind. Know that you are in a safe space. We tell these stories not to unsettle the spirit, but to remember the names of those lost, and to find a sense of order in the chaos of the waking world. Tonight, we follow a journey that spans across state lines, through the digital signals that connect us, and into the quiet resolution of a family's questions. Tonight, we travel to the vast, open skies of Arizona. It is a place where the earth remembers the heat long after the sun has set. In January, the transition from day to night in the desert is sudden and absolute. The scorching presence of the afternoon sun fades, replaced almost instantly by a deep, penetrating chill that settles over the valley. The wind whistles low through the scrub brush and the cactus, a sound that has echoed here for centuries, long before the pavement was laid. The city of Tolleson sits within this landscape, a part of the sprawling grid of the Phoenix Valley. From above, the city is a collection of straight lines and long horizons, where the amber glow of streetlights bleeds slowly into the shadow of the surrounding mountains. It is a landscape of geometry and order, where residential blocks and apartment complexes look identical in the dark. In the cool air of a January night, sound travels for miles. The distant hum of the freeway, the bark of a dog 3 streets over, the closing of a car door. Everything is amplified by the dry atmosphere. It is a setting that feels both expansive and intimate, where neighbors live stacked beside neighbors, separated only by thin walls and the silence of the desert night. As the stars began to appear over the valley on this particular evening, the city seemed entirely ordinary. But in the quiet corners of a digital map, a signal was pulsing, marking the beginning of a story that would leave a permanent mark on this stillness. The signal on the map stopped moving at a specific coordinate in Tolleson. It pointed to an apartment complex that looked like 100 others in the valley, a sprawling grid of stucco and glass designed for privacy, yet built with walls thin enough to share the rhythm of a neighbor's life. The complex sat under the orange glow of sodium streetlights. The shadows here were long and sharp, stretching across the asphalt parking lot where cars sat silent and cold. Randall Santillan lived behind one of these identical doors. He was 27 years old, a man currently existing in a space defined by recent absence. According to records that would later be examined, his ex-wife had left the apartment in December, just a month prior. The rooms he inhabited were likely filled with that specific kind of hollowness that follows a departure. There is a unique acoustics to an apartment that has recently lost half of its occupants, a silence that amplifies the hum of the refrigerator and the settling of the building's foundation. It was into this quiet atmosphere that Yasunia Norman arrived. She stepped out of the vehicle and into the crisp January air. The interstate, the I-10, hummed in the distance, a constant river of white noise that covers the valley like a blanket. It is a sound that residents of Tolleson know well, a reminder that the world is always moving, even when you are standing still. Yesenia walked toward the unit. To any observer looking out a window, it was simply a meeting, a young woman walking with the nervous energy of a first encounter. There was no sign of danger in the architecture. The manicured bushes were still. The pool water in the center of the complex was likely glass still under the winter stars. She reached the door. She stepped inside. And then the door closed. With that simple mechanical action, the latch clicking into place, The timeline of the night split in two. Outside, the traffic continued to flow toward Phoenix. The automatic sprinklers hissed to life on the lawns. The world remained loud and busy. But inside the apartment, a different reality was taking shape, hidden entirely from view. Apartment walls are thick enough to hold secrets, and the complex stood quiet under the winter stars. The neighbors, settling into their own routines of television and sleep, heard nothing that would cause them to look up. The silence of the desert night had swallowed the moment, leaving only the closed door and the cooling air to mark the passage of time. But long before the silence settled over that apartment complex, there was noise and color and the vibrant energy of a life just beginning. To understand the weight of the quiet that followed, we must first understand the voice that was lost. We must travel back, away from the shadows of Tolleson, to meet the bright and hopeful spirit who stood at the very threshold of adulthood. 18 is an age of open doors, where the world feels vast and waiting to be known. It is a time when the boundaries of childhood have dissolved, but the heavy mantle of adult responsibility has not yet fully settled on the shoulders. For Yesenia Norman, known affectionately to her family and friends as Cece, this was the season of becoming. She was standing on the edge of the rest of her life, looking out at a horizon that seemed to stretch endlessly before her, filled with promise and the sweet, dizzying scent of freedom. At the time, Yesenia was residing in a transitional facility contracted with the Arizona Department of Child Safety. It is easy to imagine such places as cold or institutional, but for those living within them, they are simply places of temporary residence, filled with the mundane rhythms of daily existence. The hallways were likely alive with the sounds of communal living, the faint murmur of a television set drifting from a neighboring room, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, and the quiet, collective breathing of young people in transit between two stages of life. From her window, she would have had a view of the Arizona sky, which in January is often a piercing, brilliant blue. It was a place of temporary roots, a pause in the journey where she could gather herself before stepping fully into the world. Her relationship with her mother, Jessica Nunez, remained a tether to her history. It is the specific, bittersweet privilege of a parent to watch a child grow, to witness the transformation from a dependent girl into a young woman navigating her own path. Jessica saw Cece not just as a daughter, but as a beautiful and bright soul, unaware that the world outside could be anything other than welcoming. Yesenia's innocence was her lens. She moved through her days with the natural curiosity of someone who believes that people are generally good and that the future is a friendly place. She was looking for connection, for that feeling of being known and understood that we all crave. But in the modern world, the search for connection often begins not in the physical world, with its clear dangers and instincts, but in the digital one. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of violet and bruised orange, Yesenia turned to the glowing screen in her hand. Trust is often built on the fragile foundation of words typed into the silence of the night. And for Cece, the blue light of her phone became a beacon. She was looking for a friend, a partner, a connection. She did not know it yet, but the signal she was sending out into the digital void was about to be answered, setting her on a path that would lead away from the safety of her room and into the quiet unknown. In the modern age, the search for companionship has shifted from the town square to the palm of a hand. It is a quiet process, performed in the solitude of a bedroom, where faces are reduced to static images and lives are summarized in a few lines of text. For Yesenia, this digital landscape was where the path began. She swiped through the profiles, each one a potential future, each one a question mark waiting to be answered. The mechanics of these applications are designed to feel like a game, but the stakes are always real human connection. Among the sea of faces, one profile eventually stood out. Randall Santillan. He was 27 years old, nearly a decade her senior. To an 18-year-old, 9 years can feel like a lifetime of experience, a promise of stability that perhaps she was seeking during her time in the transitional facility. The connection was made, not with a handshake or a shared glance across a crowded room, but with a simple notification. A small, chime-like sound that broke the silence of her evening. We often forget how much weight we place on these digital interactions. A message appears, and suddenly, the stranger on the other side feels familiar. The exchange of words creates an illusion of intimacy. You learn their favorite color, their taste in music, the rhythm of their days, but you do not know the sound of their voice or the intent behind their eyes. For days, the conversation flowed between Cece and Randall. It was a tether formed of data, invisible yet strong enough to pull her toward a decision. The date was set for January 15th. It was a Tuesday. The rhythm of the week was ordinary. The city of Phoenix moving through its usual motions of traffic and commerce. But for Cece, the day held a different weight. There is a specific kind of energy that comes with preparing to meet someone for the first time. The careful selection of an outfit, the checking of the mirror, the quiet hope that the person waiting on the other end matches the image in your mind. She told friends she was going to meet him. It was a statement of fact, devoid of fear. In her mind, she was simply moving from the digital world to the physical one, bridging the gap that had been closed by days of messaging. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in bruised purples and deep oranges. The air grew crisp, the desert shedding its heat as the night rolled in. As the sun set on January 15th, Yesenia stepped out into the cooling air, believing she was heading toward a new beginning. The destination was an apartment complex in Tolleson, a suburb that sits quietly on the western edge of the Phoenix metropolitan area. It is a landscape of beige stucco and red tile roofs, where one building looks much like the next, and the streets are laid out in a grid that offers little in the way of surprise. It is a place where people live their lives in close proximity, separated only by thin layers of drywall and insulation. Randall Santillan, a 27-year-old man, called this place home, but by mid-January, the apartment had grown significantly quieter than it had been in previous months. According to records, he had lived there with his wife until December, when she left the residence. The space was now marked by a certain vacancy, the kind of heavy emptiness that settles into a room when a life that was once shared becomes singular. Objects that once had a place were likely gone, leaving dust outlines on the shelves, and the air inside was still. The complex itself was typical of the region. At night, these places become labyrinths of shadows and amber security lights. The corridors are long and uniform, lined with doors that are identical in color and shape, distinguished only by small brass numbers. It is the architecture of anonymity. Residents come and go, passing each other in the parking lot or by the communal mailboxes, often exchanging nothing more than a nod. You can live in such a place for years and never truly know the person on the other side of the wall. You might hear the muffled sound of a television or the heavy tread of footsteps on the ceiling, but the lives within remain sealed away, private and unknown. It was here that the digital path Yesenia had followed finally intersected with the physical world. She arrived at the complex under the cover of the January darkness. The temperature had dropped, as it always does in the high desert, leaving a chill in the air that prompts people to close their windows and draw their blinds tight against the night. She walked to the door of Santillan's unit. There was no commotion that drew the attention of the neighbors. There was no shouting that echoed through the breezeways. There was simply the mundane sound of a latch clicking into place. The door closed, sealing the interior from the exterior world. Apartment walls are thick enough to hold secrets, and the complex stood quiet under the winter stars. The night continued. The traffic on the I-10 freeway hummed along in a steady, distant drone. But for Yesenia, time had stopped. The sun rose on January 16th, casting long, pale shadows across the valley floor. It was a Tuesday, a day of routine for the rest of the world. Commuters merged onto the freeway, coffee shops filled with the morning rush, and the city of Phoenix began its daily rhythm. But for Jessica Nunez, the rhythm had broken. The silence from her daughter's phone was not merely a lack of noise. It was a presence in itself, growing heavier with each passing hour. Calls went to voicemail. Messages remained unread. The digital tether that usually connected mother and daughter had gone slack. January 17th came and went, marking the passage of time with a slow, agonizing precision. Then the 18th followed, indistinguishable from the day before, save for the deepening pit of dread that settles in the stomach when a loved one vanishes. It is a specific kind of pain, the pain of not knowing. It sits in the chest, tight and cold, refusing to be ignored, even as the world outside continues its indifferent march forward. By January 19th, the waiting had become impossible to bear. The decision was made to involve the authorities. Entering a police station to file a missing person report is a surreal experience. The environment is often clinical, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee and floor wax. It is a place of procedure, where emotional chaos meets the rigid structure of bureaucracy. An officer sat behind a desk, the fabric of his uniform rustling as he adjusted his posture. He began the process of typing. The sound of keys clacking against the board was rhythmic, a dry mechanical staccato that seemed too small to contain the magnitude of the situation. Name, age, last known location. Each keystroke entered Yesenia's life into a database, transforming a vibrant 18-year-old girl into a case number, a file to be managed, a query to be run. The gears of the system turned slowly. Databases were checked. Protocols were initiated. The questions asked were standard, yet each one felt like an intrusion into the privacy of a life now interrupted. Had she run away before? Was there a boyfriend? The answers were recorded, filtered through the lens of law enforcement, and added to the growing digital pile. Outside the station, the sun began to set on another day. painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The busy world moved on, unaware that in a quiet apartment in Tolleson, the answers lay waiting in the dark. We leave pieces of ourselves everywhere we go, echoes in the data that tell the story when we cannot. It is a silent pulse that beats beneath the city streets, unseen by the human eye, but recorded in the vast memory of the network. While the physical world may go dark and the streets of Tolleson may empty for the night, the invisible web of cellular signals continues to hum, capturing the movements of a life in transit. The investigation into Yesenia's disappearance quickly turned to this digital landscape. Detectives began the slow, methodical work of pulling records, looking for the ghost in the machine. It is a process of triangulation, a mathematical way of understanding how a small device in a pocket reaches out to a steel tower miles away. It is a constant, silent conversation, a digital handshake where the phone whispers, "I am here," and the tower replies, noting the time and the place with absolute precision. According to the electronic trail, the silence of January 15th was not truly empty. The data streams began to paint a picture that witnesses could not. Like two streams merging into a single river, the digital footprints of Yesenia Norman and Randall Santillan were found to converge. The invisible map was being drawn, line by line, connecting the dots in the quiet dark of the Tolleson apartment complex. The signals placed them together, side by side in the digital void, confirming that the meeting had taken place just as the sun had set over the valley. But the map did not stop at the apartment complex. Modern vehicles, much like phones, have their own stories to tell, their own memories stored in the circuits of their dashboards. The investigation would later reveal the movement of Santillan's vehicle, a metallic ghost gliding through the grid of the city. It left a wake of data points, timestamps, and location pings that tracked its journey through the cool night air. There's a certain comfort in the precision of this technology. It ensures that even in the vastness of the Arizona desert, where the horizon seems to swallow secrets, nothing is truly lost. The detectives worked with the quiet confidence of those who know that math does not forget. They were building a timeline minute by minute, reconstructing the evening with a clarity that memory alone could never provide. The puzzle was being assembled, piece by piece, bringing order to the chaos of the unknown. The digital ghost had told its story. The signals had been traced, the handshakes verified, and the timeline established on glowing screens in cool, air-conditioned rooms. The technology had done its job, pointing the way like a compass in a storm. But while the data was being compiled, a physical discovery was about to be made that would bring the search to its heartbreaking conclusion. On January 28th, the abstract lines of the digital map finally converged on a physical door. It was a Wednesday, nearly 2 weeks since Yesenia had last been seen walking out into the winter evening. The apartment complex in Tolleson stood quiet under the midday sun, a collection of stucco walls and numbered doors that looked like any other in the sprawling valley. Neighbors went about their routines, walking dogs and collecting mail, unaware that the silence behind one specific door was about to be broken. The investigation had moved from the cool, detached world of data analysis to the warm, dusty reality of the Arizona suburbs. Officers arrived at the complex not with sirens wailing, but with the grim determination that often accompanies a search warrant served after too many days of silence. The air was still. The traffic from the nearby freeway was just a distant hum, a reminder of the world continuing to turn while time inside the apartment had stopped. When the authorities entered the residence, they were met with a heavy stillness. There was no movement inside, no sound of a television or the hum of daily life. The apartment, once shared by Randall Santillan and his wife before her departure in December, now held only the echoes of the past. It was a space defined by what and who was missing. But as they moved further into the residence, the hope that had sustained the search for 13 days began to fade, replaced by a somber realization. The scene they found told a story of tragedy. Yesenia was found within the apartment, her life ended by violence. There is no need to dwell on the specifics of the trauma. The heartbreak is heavy enough on its own. It was a senseless act, a sudden and permanent end to a life that was just beginning to bloom. 18 years of dreams, of struggles, and of growth had come to a rest in the quiet of that room. The investigation confirmed that she had likely been there since the night she disappeared, hidden away while the world outside searched and prayed. The apartment offered no other answers. Randall Santillan was not there. The space felt abandoned, as if the person who lived there had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the terrible evidence of his actions. For the officers standing in that room, the procedural work of a missing persons case shifted instantly to the weight of a homicide investigation. The waiting was over, replaced by a grief that was absolute. But the man who held the answers was no longer in Arizona. He was running. Randall Santillan was already miles away, a solitary figure moving through the vastness of the American Southwest. The interstate is a river of concrete that does not ask questions of those who travel it, and for a man looking to disappear, the road offers a seductive kind of anonymity. He was just another set of headlights cutting through the dark, another traveler in a sedan moving from one point on the map to another. But the map was changing with every hour that passed, the geography shifting outside his window as he put distance between himself and the silence he had left behind in Tolleson. He drove east, leaving the familiar grid of the Phoenix Valley for the open, high deserts of New Mexico. The landscape here is ancient and imposing, defined by mesas that rise like altars against the horizon and earth that is stained the color of rust. During the day, the sun bleaches the color out of the world, but at night, the shadows stretch long and deep, hiding the scrub brush and the dry creek beds. The air is thin and sharp, and the sound of the wind buffeting the car frame is a constant, low roar. For hundreds of miles, there's nothing but the rhythmic thump of tires on asphalt and the pale glow of the dashboard, a small island of light in a sea of darkness. As he crossed into Texas, the world flattened out. The dramatic cliffs and canyons smoothed into the endless plains of the West, where the sky feels larger than the land itself. It is a hypnotic stretch of country, where the white lines on the road pass with the regularity of a metronome, counting down the seconds of a flight that had no clear destination. Oil rigs nodded slowly in the distance like giant metallic birds feeding on the earth, and the occasional cluster of lights from a passing town would flare up and then fade into the rearview mirror, instantly relegated to the past. The rearview mirror is the fugitive's constant companion. It is a small rectangle of glass that holds the fear of what is following. But for mile after mile, it showed only the empty road and the receding night. He slept in the car, likely pulling over at rest stops where the hum of idling semi-trucks provided a cover of noise. The isolation of a vehicle on a cross-country trip is profound. It is a capsule of stale air and static radio stations, a suspended state of existence where the normal rules of time seem to bend. From the dry, flat expanse of Texas, the route turned north and east, winding toward Missouri. The vegetation began to change, the scrub brush replaced by the skeletal shapes of winter trees, their bare branches reaching up like cracks in the gray sky. The air grew heavier here, holding the moisture of the rivers that carve through the Midwest. The dryness of the desert was gone, replaced by a damp chill that settles into the bones. He was moving through the heartland of the country, passing through landscapes that looked identical in their winter dormancy. Brown fields, gray skies, and the endless gray ribbon of the highway. But the journey did not end in the Midwest. The car turned south again, drawn toward the humidity and the warmth of the Gulf Coast. Crossing into Mississippi, the atmosphere shifted once more. The air became thick and palpable, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The landscape closed in, the wide horizons of the west replaced by dense forests and bayous where the water sits still and black under the trees. It is a place where the geography feels heavy, where the Spanish moss hangs from the oaks like old lace, and the sound of the tires changed from a dry hum to a wet hiss on the pavement. He drove through the changing geography of America, putting miles between himself and the truth. But he could not outrun the signal. The digital footprint he had created was traveling with him, bouncing from tower to tower, an invisible tether connecting him back to the apartment in Tolleson. He believed he was vanishing into the deep south, losing himself in the humidity and the slow pace of the coast. But the map was already closing in. The road eventually runs out. For Randall Santillan, it ended near the ocean. The air in Biloxi sits heavy on the skin, a humid embrace that carries the scent of salt water and old pine, distinct from the dry, crisp heat of the Arizona desert. On the morning of February 6th, the sun rose over the Mississippi Sound, casting a pale, golden light across the water. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, a time when the coastal city was just beginning to stir, with fishing boats heading out into the Gulf and the early traffic moving slowly along the beachfront. For Randall Santillan, the long drive had reached its terminus. He was located by authorities not in a moment of high drama, but with the quiet efficiency of a system that never sleeps. The digital signals had done their work, guiding law enforcement to his location near the water's edge. There was no chase. There was no desperate final stand. The net simply closed. At 7 in the morning, under the soft light of the Mississippi sun, the running came to an end. The arrest was described as calm and procedural, a stark contrast to the violence that had precipitated his flight. Officers approached, the necessary words were spoken, and the handcuffs were applied. It was the mechanical restoration of order. The chaotic energy of the fugitive was replaced by the stillness of custody. He was transported to the Harrison County Adult Detention Center, a facility of concrete and steel that stands in sharp opposition to the open horizon of the coast. There, The reality of his actions in Arizona finally caught up with him. The charges were read into the record: first-degree murder and kidnapping. The legal machinery began to turn, processing the man who had tried to disappear into the geography of the South. The miles he had put between himself and the apartment in Tolleson were effectively erased. The extradition process would soon begin, a slow and legal reversal of his flight, ensuring that he would return to the place where the silence began. He had driven through New Mexico, Texas, and Missouri, seeking distance, but the law recognizes no such boundaries. With Santillan in a cell in Harrison County, the immediate questions of where and who were answered. The manhunt was over. The map was folded. But while the suspect was secured, the emotional toll of the events remained. Justice had caught up, but for those left behind, the journey of healing was just beginning. For a mother, the closing of handcuffs does not close the wound. The legal resolution provides an answer to the questions of who and where, but it rarely satisfies the agonizing question of why. Jessica Nunez was left to grapple with a reality that defied understanding, a sudden silence where there used to be a voice. In a statement that captured the raw disbelief of a parent facing the unthinkable, she said simply, "I can't imagine. I just can't imagine. Who would do that to her?" It is a question that echoes in the empty spaces left behind, a plea for reason in a situation where reason had long since fled. The community, however, sought to fill those empty spaces with support. In the days following the discovery in Tolleson, friends and strangers alike gathered in the digital space to offer comfort. Catherine Gassaway, who organized the effort to help the family with the burden of a burial, described the loss with profound sadness. She wrote of Yesenia, known affectionately to her loved ones as Cece, as a beautiful and bright 18-year-old. These words serve as a necessary counterweight to the darkness of the investigation. They remind us that before she was a case file number, and before she was a headline on the evening news, she was a daughter standing on the threshold of adulthood. We remember Cece not for how she left this world, but for the light she brought into it. 18 is an age of open doors, of plans made for the future, and of simple, quiet moments that make up a life. It is the laughter shared with friends, the messages sent late at night, and the dreams of what comes next. The tragedy of Tolleson is now a matter of public record, filed away in the archives of the court system. But the memory of the girl remains distinct, separate from the crime, preserved in the hearts of those who knew her. The investigation that began with a missing person report and spanned across the changing landscapes of the American South has reached its conclusion. The data has been analyzed, the signals have been traced, and the map has been drawn to its end. And so, the case is closed, the files are put away, and the night returns to its quiet rhythm. The map is folded, the road is empty, you are safe where you are. The desert wind blows through the canyons of Arizona, moving through the saguaros and across the long, straight highways, carrying with it the heat of the day. The silence of the desert is not empty, it is peaceful. It is a stillness that covers the land, settling over the rooftops of Tolleson and the distant lights of Phoenix. Randall Santillan is behind bars, and the threat has been removed from the night. Yesenia is at rest, her memory held safe by those who loved her. The story has been told, and the burden of knowing is lifted. Now, There is only the sound of the wind and the steady rhythm of your own breathing. Let the silence of the desert carry you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night. Hello everyone, and welcome back. I know many of you are here to find a moment of peace, to let the day drift away as you fall asleep. So get comfortable, adjust your pillows, and let the darkness of the room wrap around you. We tell these stories to remember the names of those lost and to find order in the chaos. Tonight, we travel to the vast, open skies of Arizona. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and the lives they lived. So please, close your eyes. Lower the volume until my voice is just a murmur in the background. If you are joining us for a pain-enforced nap, or simply trying to quiet a racing mind, let this story be the anchor that holds you steady. I wonder what time it is where you are right now. The night is long, but we are awake together. Trust is a fragile thing. It is built slowly, brick by brick, but it can be dismantled in the span of a single evening. It is a landscape of straight lines and long horizons, where the city lights of Phoenix bleed slowly into the shadow of the mountains. Yesenia Norman was 18 years old, standing on the threshold of a life that was just beginning to take shape. 18 is an age of open doors. It is a time when the world feels vast and waiting to be known. For Yesenia, who was known affectionately as Cece, this age marked a transition not just in numbers, but in geography. She was living in a facility contracted with the Arizona Department of Child Safety, a place that served as a bridge between childhood and the independence of adulthood. The facility was not a cold institution, but a place of temporary residence. The hallways echoed with the sounds of communal living, the murmur of televisions in the evening, and the quiet shuffle of footsteps on tile. From her window, Cece could see the Arizona sky, a canvas that shifted from the brutal white of noon to the bruised purple of dusk. She was a beautiful and bright young woman, according to those who knew her, holding on to the promise of what came next. Her relationship with her mother, Jessica Nunez, was the bond of a parent watching a child grow up, a mix of pride and the quiet, persistent worry that never truly fades. But the night has a way of changing the landscape. If you were to stand in a parking lot in Tolleson, Arizona at 2 in the morning, the world would feel entirely different. The heat of the day evaporates, leaving behind a dry, crisp chill that settles deep into the bones. The sodium streetlights cast a specific shade of orange, a heavy, artificial glow that flattens the depth of the world. Shadows stretch long and thin across the asphalt, reaching out from the base of palm trees and parked cars. In the distance, the I-10 freeway hums with a low, constant vibration, a reminder that somewhere, people are still moving. But here, in the stillness, the air tastes of dust and dry sage. The silence is not empty. It is heavy. It presses against the ears. The wind moves through the scrub brush with a dry rattle, and the stars overhead look cold and distant, watching over a sleeping city where thousands of lives are tucked away behind locked doors. But in the modern world, the search for connection often begins not in the physical world, but in the digital one. Trust is often built on the fragile foundation of words, typed into the silence of the night. Yesenia, like so many others, sought to bridge the gap of loneliness through the glowing blue screen of a smartphone. The mechanics of modern dating are simple, yet profound. A swipe of a finger, a notification that chimes in the dark, the anticipation of a message that might signal the beginning of something new. It is a digital tether that connects strangers across the sprawling grid of the city. Through this invisible network, she connected with a man named Randall Santillan. We can imagine the exchange, the small bursts of dopamine with every reply, the illusion of intimacy that forms when you trade stories with a stranger in the quiet hours. It is easy to project our hopes onto the blank slate of a profile picture. On January 15th, the decision was made to meet. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and violet, Yesenia stepped out into the cooling air. She believed she was heading toward a new beginning. She did not know that the digital tether was pulling her toward a silence that would last forever. Apartment walls are thick enough to hold secrets, and the complex in Tolleson stood quiet under the winter stars. Randall Santillan was 27 years old. His apartment, a standard unit in a complex of identical doors and uniform windows, had grown quieter in recent weeks. His ex-wife had left in December, leaving the space with that specific, hollow echo of a home that is no longer whole. The complex itself was a study in anonymity. Rows of parked cars, the faint sound of a television playing through a shared wall, the smell of laundry detergent drifting from a vent. It was a place where neighbors nodded to one another, but rarely stopped to speak. Yesenia arrived at this complex, guided by the map on her phone, guided by the trust she had placed in the digital signals. She stepped through the door. The door closed, and the apartment in Tolleson returned to its silence. Outside, the traffic on the freeway continued its endless loop. The automatic sprinklers hissed to life on the manicured lawns. But for Yesenia, time had stopped. The walls held their breath, and the night moved on without her. Phone calls went to voicemail. Messages remained unread. The specific pain of not knowing is a dull ache that sits in the chest, making it hard to breathe. It is the glance at the phone every time it buzzes. It is the waiting for a sound that does not come. On January 19th, the official missing person report was filed. The gears of bureaucracy began to turn. Reports were typed. Databases were checked. Police officers asked the standard questions, their voices calm and practiced. The contrast between the busy, paperwork-filled world of the investigation and the quiet absence of the missing girl was stark. The city continued to function. People went to work. They bought groceries. They slept. But in the center of it all, there was a void where Yesenia used to be. But silence does not mean absence of evidence. The digital world never sleeps. We leave pieces of ourselves everywhere we go, echoes in the data that tell the story when we cannot. The investigation turned to the ghost in the machine, the invisible network of signals that surrounds us all. Imagine, for a moment, the air around you. It looks empty, but it is filled with a silent pulse. Millions of invisible lines crisscross the sky, connecting phones to towers, carrying data through the atmosphere like a digital wind. Every time a phone connects to a tower, it engages in a handshake, a silent agreement that logs a location, a time, and an identity. This data travels from the device through the air, down into fiber optic cables buried deep beneath the city streets, and into servers that hum in cold, windowless rooms. It is a digital heartbeat that never stops, even when the city sleeps. Investigators began to trace this heartbeat. They pulled the records. They triangulated the signals. They placed Randall Santillan and Yesenia Norman together in the digital landscape on the night of January 15th. The invisible map was being drawn, line by line, connecting the dots that led straight to the apartment in Tolleson. The data did not lie. It simply remembered what had been forgotten. The waiting was over, replaced by a grief that was absolute. On January 28th, nearly 2 weeks after Yesenia had stepped out into the winter night, police entered the apartment in Tolleson. The timeline had run out. The scene they found told a story of tragedy. There was no chaos, only the stillness of a room where life had been interrupted. Yesenia was found within the apartment. Her life had been ended by violence. The police report would later note the details, the specific tragedy of 27 wounds. But tonight, we focus only on the silence that followed. The apartment was empty of life. Randall Santillan was gone. He had left behind the hollow space, left behind the consequences of the evening, and had taken to the road. The realization settled over the investigators like a heavy blanket. The man they needed was no longer in Arizona. He was running. He drove through the changing geography of America, putting miles between himself and the truth. But he could not outrun the signal. The flight of Randall Santillan was a journey across the spine of the continent. He drove from the dry heat of Arizona into the red rocks of New Mexico, and then into the vast, flat expanse of Texas. It is a hypnotic thing to drive across the country. The landscape shifts slowly, almost imperceptibly. The sharp, jagged silhouettes of the saguaro cactus give way to the low scrub of the high desert. The soil changes from the pale, dusty beige of the west to the rich, rusted red of the plains. As he crossed into East Texas and moved toward the south, the air itself began to change. The dry, crisp bite of the desert was replaced by the heavy, wet blanket of humidity. Pine trees began to line the highway, standing like tall, dark sentinels on either side of the road. The light through the windshield softened, filtered by the moisture in the air. The endless blue sky of the west was replaced by the low, gray clouds of the south. For thousands of miles, the only constant was the sound of tires on asphalt, a rhythmic hum that vibrated through the frame of the car. He slept in the vehicle, watching the rearview mirror, watching the road behind him, unaware that the invisible map was still being drawn, tracking his movement from tower to tower, state to state. At 7 in the morning, under the soft light of the Mississippi sun, the running came to an end. It was February 6th. Randall Santillan had reached Biloxi, a city that sits on the edge of the Gulf of Mexico, where the air smells of salt water and the horizon is a flat, endless line of blue. The arrest was calm. There was no shootout. There was no high-speed chase. It was simply the closing of the net. The digital tether that had connected him to Yesenia now connected him to justice. Officers took him into custody without incident. He was transported to the Harrison County Adult Detention Center, a building of concrete and steel that would become his new world. He was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. The extradition process began, the slow administrative work of moving a man back to the place where his secrets had been uncovered. The road trip was over. The long drive had led him only to a cell. We remember Cece not for how she left this world, but for the light she brought into it. As the legal machinery began to turn, the voice of Jessica Nunez cut through the noise. "I can't imagine," she said, her words heavy with the disbelief that accompanies such loss. "I just can't imagine. Who would do that to her?" A GoFundMe was organized by Catherine Gassaway to help with the burial. The community gathered, not just to mourn, but to remember. They spoke of a beautiful and bright 18-year-old. They spoke of her potential. They spoke of the life she should have lived. We tell this story to acknowledge that light, to ensure that her name is spoken not just in the context of a crime, but in the context of a life. The tragedy is part of the story, but it is not the whole story. The love of a mother, the memory of friends, and the quiet dignity of a community coming together. These are the things that endure. And so the case is closed, the files are put away, and the night returns to its quiet rhythm. The map is folded. The road is empty. Let us return for a moment to the Arizona desert. The wind is blowing through the canyons now, a gentle, steady breeze that cools the earth after the heat of the day. The stars are overhead, millions of them, burning in the deep velvet sky. It is peaceful here. Randall Santillan is behind bars, and the threat has been removed from the night. Yesenia is at rest, her memory held safe by those who loved her. The story has been told, and the burden of knowing is lifted. Now, there is only the sound of the wind and the steady rhythm of your own breathing. You are safe where you are. Let the silence of the desert carry you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night.